And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Merry Christmas. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service in Alaska region, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Christmas Eve afternoon, Wednesday, December 24th, 2024. We start out with the sea ice. The ice has redeveloped across the eastern Bering Sea and along the west coast. We also have brisk northerly gale force winds that are going to tend to want to drive the ice southward the next couple of days. And we'll highlight that with the actual marine forecast, cause being these low pressures that later tonight into early Christmas Day will be located from around Bristol Bay back on toward the eastern Aleutians, but more importantly, we have the stronger low coming up from the North Pacific into the Gulf, and the combination of these lows with higher pressure over Siberia is going to really keep a tight pressure gradient along the west side of the state, especially there, Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island, where high wind warnings are in effect into Christmas Day. We also have high wind warnings in effect here for the southern western panhandle, Sitka, Prince of Wales Island, on over through Ketchikan and Metlakatla. As this low and frontal system lifts north, we have a very strong east-southeast winds, could gust as high as 60 miles an hour overnight and into Christmas Day. The low will continue to slowly lift back toward the north and west. This is for Christmas Day afternoon. And we still have low pressure that kind of pivots back to the north and west over the lower Bering and eastern Aleutians. Stalled out stationary front, colder air is going to be slipping down into the north slope by the weekend. And so with these features in place, by Thursday, the low pulls back toward the Kenai Peninsula in the western Gulf. This occluded front has a tendency to push inland into northwest Canada and wash out. And then we still have the stationary front out across the central interior along south of the Brooks Range, with strong northerly flow continuing, especially out over the central and eastern half of the Aleutians. So the marine forecast Wednesday, Christmas Day, 45 knot gales from the south-southeast here, Dixon Entrance, south of Sitka. Waves in excess of 20 feet expected. Inner channels, southeast winds 25 knots, 4 5-foot waves for Stevens Passage up through Lynn Canal. For the outer coast, we get out west of Yakutat, Cape Suckling, 35 knot easterly gales with 17-foot waves. On Thursday, south-southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, 4 to 5-foot waves, Lynn Canal down through Stevens Passage, but 10-footers still south of Metlakatla. For the outer coast, winds will be south to easterly at 30 to 35 knots, and waves generally still around and over 20 feet south of Sitka, falling back off to 18 there by the time you get toward Cape Suckling. For outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, easterly winds 25 to 30 knots, waves 12 feet. Within Prince William Sound, east winds 20 knots, 4-foot waves. And then as we go down along the length of Cook Inlet, northeast to east winds 15 to 20 knots with waves of 4 to 5 feet. On Thursday, look for variable winds within Prince William Sound, Upper Cook Inlet with waves only a couple of feet. Easterly winds 15 to 20 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance with 12-foot waves. And then as we drop down through Lower Cook Inlet, north to variable northwest winds, and waves generally 3 feet there off of Anchor Point down into the lower portion of Cook Inlet. Winds will be southeasterly across Kodiak Island around 15 knots on Christmas Day, increasing to 20 to 25 knots as we trail off along the length of the Alaska Peninsula. Waves 7 to 11 feet on the North Pacific side, 2 to 6 feet on the Bering side, and then variable winds around 10 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island for Thursday, turning back more toward the northwest to north and picking up to 30 knots by the time we get down to the far south end of the peninsula, with waves running 7 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side, 6 to as high as 14 feet on the Bering side. Across the Aleutian chain on Christmas Day, strong northerly flow, winds of 30 to 40 knots, highest winds right around Atka through Adak and there westward at 35 to 40 knots. Waves could be in excess of 20 feet there north of the Aleutians there through the lower Bering. And then on Thursday, we still have northerly gales to 35 knots across the eastern and central Aleutians. And once we get west of Adak, those winds fall back off northwest 30 knots and then westerly 20 knots by the time you get toward Kiska and Shemya. Along the southwest coast, we have Easterly to northeasterly winds out of Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, but 35-knot northerly gales, that wider expanse of the Norton Sound between Nome and Emonic and along the outer Yukon coast, and then 45-knot gales there at St. Matthew, 20-foot waves, and 35-knot gales out of the north there along the Pribilofs with waves of 15 feet. Still on Thursday, we find northerly gales of 35 knots coming off of outside there of Kuskokwim Bay, north side of Nunavik Island, St. Matthew, St. Paul. And for the upper stretch here of Norton Sound, upper portion of the Yukon Delta, 25 to 30 knot northerly winds with ice in place. And again, there's going to be a tendency for this ice to want to push southward with these strong winds the next couple of days. And as we look in the far north through the Bering Strait, northerly gales 40 to 45 knots with higher gusts. There's potential issues with ice shifting and some freezing spray and any openings that may occur, especially say on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. As we go up through the Chukchi, winds fall off and turn northeasterly, 10 to 15 knots once you get north of Point Lay. And then Utqiagvik eastward through Kaktovik on Christmas Day, we're looking at northeast winds around 10 knots. And for Thursday, those winds will become east-northeasterly 15 knots from Kaktovik through Utqiagvik down to Point Lay. And then they will increase again, generally out of the north, 25 to 30 knots across the lower Chukchi, maybe turn inland a bit toward Kotzebue Sound. But otherwise, through the Bering Strait along the west side of the Seward Peninsula and north side of St. Lawrence Island on Thursday, we're still going to see northerly gales of 35 knots. That's going to create blowing snow and some shifting ice as well. So all of you have a Merry Christmas and stay safe.